Good afternoon. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Concrete Institute of Australia. I'm John Nichols, and it's my pleasure to be your host for this afternoon's webinar on Champions of Change, Dismantling the Barriers to Gender Equality. The speakers are Isabella Jansen, Ellen Paperny, Kate Robilliard, Jeannie van Zyl, and Colin Rossetti. I'd now like to hand over to Isabella Jansen, the Chair of Women in Concrete, to introduce the webinar. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in extending a very warm welcome to Isabella.
Thanks, John. Hi, everyone, and happy International Women in Engineering Day. I'm Isabella, Chair of Women in Concrete, and it's an honour to welcome you to today's webinar on dismantling the barriers to gender equality. Our goal at Women in Concrete is to create an inclusive and empowering space for women to excel in all aspects of the industry, which is why today's webinar is so important. Today's speakers are Kate Robilliard, Executive Director of Operations and Vice President for Water, Digital, and Project and Program Delivery Solutions at Jacobs, Australia and New Zealand. Jeannie van Zyl, Civil Engineer at AECOM. Colin Rossetti, Leader of AECOM, Australia and New Zealand, Resources and Industrial Business Line. And Ellen Paperny, HR Business Partner at Jacobs, who will be facilitating today's panel discussion. Whether you're here to learn, reflect, or lead change, thank you. Your presence matters. Now let's get into the conversation and let's make it count. Everyone, please welcome Ellen.
I'll start again. Thank you very much, Isabella, for the introduction, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ellen Paperny, and I'm dialing in from the land of the Bidjigal people here in Southeast Sydney. So our session today on dismantling the barriers to gender equality is a topic that is not only timely, but also crucial for the progress of the engineering industry and for society as a whole. We know that despite the significant advancements we have seen over years, women still remain underrepresented in the engineering field. This is not due to a lack of talent or a lack of ambition, but rather it's due to systemic barriers that continue to persist over time. So a little bit about me before we kick off. I have worked in HR my whole career. In various industries. I've worked in financial services, defence, banking, law, and engineering most recently. And in my current role here at Jacobs, I'm a HR partner, and part of my role is also sitting on the Champions of Change Coalition as an implementation lead. I know many of you are probably wondering what the coalition is, so I will start our session today with a brief overview and some slides to talk about what it is, what the goals are, and what we as organisations gain from being members of the coalition. Following that overview, we'll move into a panel discussion, and our wonderful panelists, Kate, Jeannie, and Colin, will join us for that discussion, which I will facilitate. I will definitely remain with time for questions at the end, so please, as John has said, type your questions into the question function on Zoom, and we'll aim to get to those at the end of the session. So let's start with a brief overview and a history of the Champions of Change Coalition and its purpose. So the coalition was started by Liz Broderick, who was the former Sex Discrimination Commissioner during her second term as Commissioner, when she recognised that in order to achieve gender equality, we need to engage workplace leaders. She realised that gender equality in the workplace requires the involvement of those who run the workplace, and without the commitment of influential leaders, progress would be limited. So in 2010, Liz approached 8 CEOs to form the founding group, which she called the Male Champions of Change. The initial group included leaders from various sectors, such as business, government, academia, the military, and these leaders committed to publicly advocating for gender equality and implementing practical actions within their organisations. The focus of the coalition at the time was increasing women's representation in leadership and creating respectful, inclusive workplaces. Annika Fryer was appointed as the inaugural CEO of the coalition in 2016, and under her leadership, the coalition has grown significantly and gained international recognition for its efforts around promoting gender equality. The Champions of Change Coalition expanded to include women leaders in December of 2020 and evolved to become the Champions of Change Coalition with the tagline, "Men stepping up beside women on gender equality." The coalition grew from the original founding group to encompass over 250 leaders across 16 groups covering every major sector in the economy. And members are committed to ensuring that gender equality becomes a significant focus within their organisation. So there are 4 guiding principles behind the coalition. I'll briefly take you through them now. So the first one is men stepping up beside women. So this is not about men leading the charge. It's about men working and stepping up beside women. We know that this joint effort between men and women is crucial for making significant progress in gender equality. And as Liz said, you can see the quote on the screen, gender equality is not a battle of the sexes. It's a battle for equality, a battle that men and women must wage side by side. The empowerment of women is about the empowerment of humanity. The second principle is to prioritise achieving progress. And this is about ensuring that member organisations are committed to properly resourcing gender equality initiatives. This includes allocating both human and financial resources to ensure sustained progress is made. Org-wide initiatives do require some investment, and member organisations should be committed to investment and spending in this space. The third principle is to stand behind our numbers, sharing lessons learnt. This is about measuring and publishing results because transparency and accountability are vital. Champions of Change members publicly report their progress and share lessons learnt. Every year, the coalition publishes what we call an impact report, which tracks our year-on-year progress and encourages continuous improvement. And finally, the fourth principle, shift the system, not fix the women. This is around avoiding solutions that put the onus or the work on women to adapt, and the focus is on addressing systemic barriers that hinder women's advancement. It's about creating supportive systems that ensure women have equal opportunities, especially when returning to work or taking time off. This principle also applies to men, ensuring that they also are not penalised for taking time off. We know that gender norms are the core driving factor around inequality, so we need to make every effort to challenge and change these norms to create a more equitable environment for everybody. So what does this mean to be a member of the Champions of Change Coalition, and how does it translate into the organisation itself? So every member organisation has a champion, which is typically the CEO of the business within that particular geography. This individual is the lead representative for the organisation and has ultimate accountability for driving and implementing actions to address gender equality in their firm. All the champions from member organisations come together quarterly to discuss and collaborate on key issues and agree on actions their respective firms will take, or actions that they will work together as a coalition group. Both Jacobs and AECOM have been members of the Consult Australia Champions of Change Coalition for many years. Jacobs' current champion is Camille, as you can see on the slide, and AECOM's is Mark. And you can read their personal bios and why this is a priority for them on the slide in front of you. Every member organisation also has what we call an implementation lead, and these are usually inclusion and diversity or HR professionals that work alongside the champion to drive the agreed actions through the organisation. Implementation leads from member organisations also come together quarterly to share insights, to discuss key topics, and come up with ideas and actions to support gender equality within their organisation. So as I mentioned before, both Jacobs and AECOM have been privileged to be part of Consult Australia Champions of Change Coalition for many years. And it's safe to say we've both organisations seen many benefits and much progress in this space as a result. So I'll give you a bit of a flavour of some of the initiatives and changes that we as organisations have implemented stemming from our work as the Champions of Change Coalition. So both Jacobs and AECOM have removed the qualifying period for when parental leave can be taken. This means that anybody can take paid parental leave from the day they join their firm. They don't need to wait what was previously a 12-month qualifying period. At Jacobs, we've abolished the idea of primary and secondary carers leave and moved to shared care, which means that any parent can access equal parental leave benefits at any point in time. Both firms have removed barriers to flexible working, allowing all employees to request to work in a way which suits them. And both AECOM and Jacobs have introduced 10 days of paid leave for family and domestic abuse before it became legislated. We have everyday respect programs that have been launched throughout the organisations, which focus on understanding where our individual bias may come from and setting the standard for respectful and inclusive language and behaviour. And currently, we're focused on a number of initiatives, including reducing the gender pay gap and positive duty to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace. So my final slide before we go to the panel discussion is just to point you to the tools and the resources that are available to anybody, whether you're a member or not. And there's a few, but I'll just highlight a couple that are probably most relevant to our conversation today. So the first one I want to highlight is the 7 Switches report, which Jacobs played a significant part in the development of. It's a practical guide to help organisations identify common decision glitches that hinder progress and how to switch them in order to address these glitches. The Everyday Respect report is another great resource and one that both Jacobs and AECOM have and continue to use. And that focuses on building respectful workplaces and includes practical steps for fostering a culture of respect within the organisation. The Leadership Shadow is a tool that helps leaders understand their impact on gender equality and guides them in creating a more inclusive environment. At Jacobs, we've used this extensively with our leaders, helping them to prioritise their time and effort and also to reflect back on the impact that they are making. Sponsorship Track highlights the importance of sponsorship for women in leadership roles. And we'll hear from Jeannie shortly regarding her experience on the sponsorship program at AECOM. And finally, closing the gender pay gap, obviously very topical for many with the public release of gender pay gap data, which started last year. This report offers strategies and toolkits for addressing and closing gender pay gaps within an organisation. And I really want to encourage you to jump onto the website and have a look around. There's a lot of information and many great resources for you to refer to. So now that we've covered a brief overview of the coalition, it is my great pleasure to introduce our panel members who will be sharing their experiences and insights on our topic today. As we've heard, we've got with us Kate Robilliard, Jeannie van Zyl and Colin Rossetti, and we will hand over to them to do a brief introduction and then through some facilitated questions. So Kate, I might hand over to you to start with, please.
Thank you, Ellen. Hello everyone, and happy International Women in Engineering Day. So as Ellen said, I'm Kate Robilliard, and you can see some images on screen from my career, which should hopefully give you a bit of a flavour for my career journey. And I think the theme of my career has been about saying yes. Saying yes to something that's out of my comfort zone is certainly where I've experienced the greatest joy and the greatest learning throughout my career. And you can see that through some of the images that I've chosen. So saying yes to a move to Brisbane to work on a dam upgrade, saying yes when my partner, now my husband, asked me to move with him to the UK, stepping out of engineering to lead a client experience change management program, leading teams with different technical backgrounds to my own, and then most recently saying yes to being the local executive sponsor of our LGBTQ plus employee network PRISM, which is where I'm doing my most recent learning. So I've also been asked to share a career highlight as part of my introduction, and given we're at a Women in Concrete event, I'll share the flood security upgrade of Wivenhoe Dam, which is that photo you can see in the middle there, because it's probably the biggest concrete structure I've ever worked on. And the reason it's a highlight is because I've had the pleasure of working on that project right from options assessment through concept and detailed design to construction. And it's pretty rare that you actually get to follow a project like that all the way through. And for me, it was the first time that I actually saw something built that I had been involved in designing, which was a nice, feeling. And then I guess the other thing that I've been asked to do as part of my introduction is also to share a little bit about my why around gender equality. And for me, it's about breaking down those barriers so that people behind me have an easier path. And I'll give you an example of that. So my family's a little bit different in that I work full time and my husband does all the unpaid work as the primary carer of our kids. And back when we switched to this setup, I used to be the primary carer. And when we switched to my husband being the primary carer, only about 3% of families with children under the age of 15 in Australia had women in the relationship as working full time. And at that time, we experienced a lot of odd looks and comments because we were bending societal norms. And that was in the early to mid 2010. So that wasn't too long ago. And I've certainly seen that change between when that occurred and where we are now. Now I'll hand over to Jeannie van Zyl to introduce herself.
Thanks, Kate. Thank you very much. And wow, what a great story. I really enjoyed hearing a bit more about your background. So I'll do something similar. I've got a few photos on the screen. Top left is my graduating class. So I graduated in South Africa as a civil engineer at the end of 2009. And even though the picture is a little bit small, I can tell you I did a count. 27% of my civil engineering graduating class were women or female. And yeah, that sort of set the scene for the career that I set out to follow. But I do want to show you some of the highlights that I've had over the years. So first photo of the excavator lifting up a big water pipeline. That is a pipe that we built out in a place called Soshanguve, which is like a rural township outside of Pretoria, one of our capitals. And that was secondment. So I was seconded to a contractor straight out of uni. I worked with a civil contractor working sort of on the quality management side of this pipeline construction for around 18 months. So that was my warm welcome into engineering on site. Since then, I've been on a few sites, but mostly working in a consulting role. So I've not been full-time on site since 2010, but I've been working on really cool projects, including top right, that is part of the enabling works for the Sydney Metro. So the Sydney Metro, for those of you who know Sydney, that is an underground rail project that's really changed how people get around every day. And as part of the enabling works, quite a few surface works had to be done before they could go in and dig the station boxes. So I led the design of some road relocation works. But coming to the bottom, I wanted to share with you some of the people that I really love working with every day. On the bottom left and the second from left at the bottom, both of those are screenshots of some of the networking events and other sort of networking and mentoring experiences that I've been able to help lead. So aside from being a principal engineer in our renewables and generation and advisory business in energy, I also help lead our mentoring circles, our women's mentoring circles at Sydney office in AECOM. So that's a really great place to help connect other women, with one another and build links between business lines as part of events and just other initiatives that we arrange. The other people at the bottom are also really close to my heart, are my energy teammates. So there's a picture of us sitting at a restaurant, just having a big celebration after a major deliverable. And they're really great folks, everyone in energy, such a talented bunch of people, and I enjoy working with them. But two of the people who take up most of my time are the two little boys with their hivers, and that's us doing off-the-clock learning. So work doesn't stop. Mama has to keep on show and tell, telling kids what's happening. And I think just seeing the world through my children's eyes have really helped make me more aware of construction and the realities of what everyone faces on site every day. So Colin, I think you're next.
Thanks, Jeannie. Well, hello, everyone. I started my career so long ago, it was in black and white, as you can see up there on the top left. And I started as a graduate in research and development, of all places, at Mount Isa, which was actually interesting because at the time it was quite a diverse team. We had scientists as well as engineers in the team, and maybe that got me off to a good start in terms of diversity and inclusion later in my career. I took a couple of significant career breaks, firstly spending 4 or 5 years in Europe, working over there, and then secondly through an extended period of travel in South America. It all culminated in myself coming back from overseas, engaged and starting with AECOM in 2002. Since then, there's two highlights I can pick from many, I suppose, from my time at AECOM. First of all, was being involved in Trackstar Alliance, which was a railway alliance for QR and Horizon, which was a very interesting, very large program of work for rail projects for in QR and Horizon's networks. And secondly, having the opportunity to present at an international conference on one of my projects in Sweden, and getting the opportunity to visit one of the mines up near the Arctic Circle called LKAB in Sweden, which I found out at the time from the mine manager that they actually had over 50% female representation in their workforce, and this was about 2015. So it can be done. My recent drivers, I guess, for gender equality really stem from my family, especially seeing my daughter face the challenges of recently starting a career with IT. She also has some special needs that adds a bit of extra flavour to her challenges, and I guess a little bit of extra challenge in terms of her employers as well. But I'm glad to say that that's going quite well. And lastly, I guess in terms of business, one of the things that I'm often conscious of is how we equally share in things like celebrations, like the one we see here in the bottom right. It's something that can easily overlook female engagement, especially in formal events, when there still could be a really great opportunity for building a professional network and seeking out sponsors. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Kate, Jeannie, and Colin. So now we will move to the exciting panel discussion that we have planned for you all today. And I will swap into the role of facilitator, and I'll have the pleasure of asking questions to our panel members. So I'm going to start with you, Colin, if I can. Liz Broderick has often emphasised that gender equality is not a women's problem. It's a battle that men and women must wage side by side. So you are clearly joining us today for this important discussion. Why is it important to have mixed gender representation on the panel today? And can you tell us a little bit about the panel pledge that you have made, which is a Champions of Change initiative?
Yeah, so thanks for that. And thanks to the Concrete Institute of Australia for giving me the opportunity today. I think when it comes to representation, it often comes down to that often sort of quoted anecdote of, you can't be what you can't see, right? And that goes both for female professionals as well as male professionals in the roles that we want them to aspire to. So, without diversity representation when it comes to things, such as conferences, panel discussions like this one, even media appearances, it's much more difficult to shape the narrative around a broader opinion or even to shape policy. And to that end, I'm pledging to include, female representation in not only these kind of events, but in all forums where we struggle to achieve a diversity of participation. Practically, I think this can be improved by choosing the right forums to begin with. That's the first decision you can make, which I hope will broaden in time so that, experience for all participants is worthwhile and the contributions are meaningful. I do think a lot of conference organisers, webinar hosts, etc., are getting a lot better at driving this too, which is great to see. In terms of men's role in driving change, I think we do play a number of key roles in driving generational change, such as certainly first for me is being a male ally. Right, so I think it's mainly a behavioural trait. So this is including things like calling out inappropriate behaviour, calling out biased decision making, and so on. But also taking a really active role in advocating for female team members when it comes to their career advancement. One, I guess, important thing to note, or one important role in being an ally, is to drive alignment with expectations between women and men, which even right now is generally seen as quite poor in that men and women disagree on the priorities when it comes to driving engagement. And there's some telling information in this space that we saw this week from AEOST, which indicates there's still a wide gap between what women say is important, what men say is important, and what men are actually participating in. So implementing of change in a more formal sense, men in leadership positions, for example, can implement policies if they don't already exist, which assist in female participation and inclusion. This has in the past, of course, centered around flexible working, equal pay, and those sorts of examples. And lastly, and I think quite importantly, education. So whether it's in their families or in other settings, mentoring of boys and girls around the importance of equality and diversity, not just with respect to gender, of course, is a powerful way to shape a more inclusive mindset for our future.
Thank you, Colin. You touched on some really important points there in the role that men can play on this topic. And I want to turn to you, Jeannie, please. We heard obviously the male allies are essential in advancing gender equality. We've heard Colin talk about his why. Can you share an example of where a male ally has significantly supported you in your career and how their actions made a difference?
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, I think that's a really good point to mention. So there's many examples. Throughout my career, I've had quite a few men really supporting me and cheering me on, just to help me realize that I can reach my potential regardless of my identity. When I was early in my career on site, I showed you guys some photos of when I was on that construction site. This was considered by some quite an unsafe, like physically an unsafe environment, just due to the nature of the setting. And there were also, I was also the only woman aside from the tea lady on site. So I was a minority, and I was also young. I was just a young graduate. But that didn't mean that my site agent that I reported to didn't give me the chance to go have a go at things. He was a wonderful mentor in terms of, and also someone who was an ally in terms of helping me to stay safe. He really was quite conscious of putting measures in place that I didn't get into situations that are not appropriate for me to be in. But yeah, he was wonderful in giving that balance between exposure, but also making sure that I'm safe and respected. I guess another sort of in the consulting environment, there were a few examples. I know we were talking about the Advocate program, which is one of the initiatives from the Champions of Change. And that's also, I actually got to know Colin. So Colin was one of the sponsors on the Advocate program, and I was a sponsee, although we were not in a sponsoring relationship. I was linked to a gentleman who is our regional finance director, who's looking after all the finances for Australia and New Zealand, and a really, really senior leader within our regional geography. And throughout this program, which spanned over a year, my sponsor, Ian, was wonderful in, taking his role very seriously to help broaden my network, so to help to introduce me to people, and similarly other male leaders who were also part of that program did the same. There were some very significant moments for me over that year's program where I met our global president, which was something that wouldn't have happened had I not been working with one of the senior leaders part of this program. But just having an exposure to learn about the challenges that people at different levels of our organization face, that was a great part of the Advocate program. But I think for me that the key thing was, and I think your question was about how has the actions from these male allies changed my behavior or made a difference to me. I think that sponsorship, that making the casual introductions, taking a moment that might be insignificant for me, but that might mean a lot to someone else, to actually make that introduction, use the coffee machine as a sort of a little point of connection, and introducing the people that I know who might be young up and coming leaders to others who have really, big roles on major projects or resourcing a big tender. That's something that I can do and just say like, hi, have you met so-and-so? This person is really good at that, and we've worked together on this. Who knows what can happen? So I think that advocating, that really just opened my eyes to seeing the difference that I could make, in other people's lives, similar to how it's been done for me.
Thanks, Shani. There's some great examples there, I guess, of both formal, the Advocate program, and informal mentoring and sponsorship of you in your career, and the progress that you've seen and the benefit that's had for you. I'm interested, Colin, as a follow-up to you, this Advocate program that you were a sponsor on. Can you share a bit about your experience being a sponsor on this program at AECOM?
Thanks, Ellen. I've been a sponsor for a couple of talented female leaders in recent years, and it's been a great experience. We worked through a fairly structured program over Journey, probably about 6 or 7 months of a year. So it's quite an extended period of time, and you get, and that's an important thing. You do get plenty of time to get to understand, the sponsee, and the sponsee to understand the sponsor. Which is really important for teaching both the sponsee and the sponsor, how to go about their roles going forward, right? We get the opportunities to see how people go about their daily work through day in the life of exercises and things like this, which is always a bit of fun. And look, for me personally, I get a lot out of the program. especially how it reveals for me some of those unseen experiences that women have during the advancement of their careers to date. Some of the challenges they've experienced, some of the biases they've seen in decision making by their senior leaders potentially, and then understanding how it's impacted them from their point of view, which is really important. I find it's a really great way to keep challenging my own unconscious biases, for example, exercising that muscles, through the program. We do quite a lot of work on this, including, strategies to recognize and avoiding those sort of behaviors if and when they come up. So I think it definitely works both ways, no question about it. You can't have good sponsorship without both a good sponsee and a good sponsor.
And a good program, which it sounds like AECOM have. So that's fabulous to hear.
Really good. And if I might just add as well, having this relationship was very interesting because I think with Colin as well, the person that was his sponsee, they didn't sit in the same business line. So we kind of tried to remove that conflict of interest with having someone who might, have some role to play in your succession. But it was so interesting, having a bit of feedback that might not be from a perspective that I was used to hearing. When the finance director attended my team meeting, for example, his feedback around, the questions that he had were just coming from quite a different angle. And I think it helps us to also realize that in every situation that we have in our professional life, there's opportunity for us to step in someone else's shoes and just recognize that there's more than one way to think about a situation.
I was just going to add there too, as executive leadership teams, we spend a lot of time talking about top talent within our organisation, and sometimes we don't necessarily have the visibility of that, particularly with women who may not have that sponsorship. So having that formal program is a really great way of making sure that happens, and it gives your executive leadership team that visibility on female talent within your organisation. So it's a really good outcome.
Thanks, everyone. Kate, I might stay with you and just changing topic slightly. I'm sure many on the call can relate that it can be challenging working on site in a male-dominated environment as a female. And I know you've had some experience of that in your early career. So wondering if you can share a story from that time and what you've learned from that experience.
Thank you, Ellen. That is a great question, because I've certainly faced some challenges as a woman in a male-dominated industry, but I'd say there've been probably more of them that I've experienced in the site environment. Less so now that I've got some more experience, but certainly in the earlier part of my career, especially with some outdated attitudes. So as I mentioned in my intro, I worked on a dam project in Queensland, and I spent about a year on site as part of that project. And generally, the challenges that I faced related to me not being taken seriously. So I'll give an example of that. So one day we were due to pour a bridge abutment, and because it was going to be owned by Transport Main Roads Queensland once it was finished, one of their inspectors came out to site to inspect the steelwork and the formwork and to watch the pour. Now, when he got to site, he introduced himself to everyone on site except me. He didn't even acknowledge me. He walked straight past. And then he went to inspect the formwork and the steelwork, and he started to say that we weren't actually going to be able to pour that day because he didn't feel there was enough cover between the steel and the formwork. Myself and another site engineer were talking to each other, and between us we thought he was wrong because, we'd done the inspections ourselves during the week as they were pulling together, the work, and it felt we felt that it complied with the TMR specifications. And because this was many years ago, we actually had a hard copy of the specs with us, and we checked it and discovered that actually we were right. But I thought, if I approached him and told him he's wrong, I didn't think I'd actually get anywhere because, he hadn't even acknowledged me when he'd showed up on site. So I decided to use curiosity, and I introduced myself, and then I said something along the lines of, could you please show me in the specification where the required covers are shown, because, I'm learning and I don't understand why we can't pour today. And he replied, oh yeah, of course, and started flipping through the specification. And to his credit, when he realised he was wrong and we did actually have enough cover, he admitted it, and he told me the specification had changed since he'd last looked at it. And he actually said we could pour that day. And then, funnily enough, he asked me for my business card. But coming back to the question about what you said, you asked me what I've learned. And I think the first thing to take away from that story is that I knew we were right, but I had been excluded from the conversation. And if I hadn't chosen to speak up, we had a huge amount of quantity of concrete that we'd mixed at the batching plant on site, which would have had to have been dumped and not used. And we would have spent hours reworking that steelwork and formwork in order to get it to the right position. It was a complicated structure and it would have taken a lot of time. And so I think it's really a great example of why it's important to have diversity, but not just diversity, to also make sure we include people so they feel safe to speak up. And then the second thing, I guess, from that is that I shouldn't have had to pretend that I didn't know the answer in order to have that conversation. But I didn't, as I said, my experiences on site have all been when I don't think people will take me seriously. And I don't think this guy would have taken me seriously if I'd approached him and told him that I thought he was wrong.
Thanks, Kate. That's a really good example. And I appreciate how hard that must have been, especially early on in your career. And really glad that you found the courage and spoke up. Staying with the site questions around site, Jeannie, just turning to you. You obviously started your career in South Africa and you had some experience on site there. Can you relate to some of these challenges that Kate has mentioned and maybe share your own experience?
Yeah, I think it's definitely quite tricky when you are learning and to just be able to still stand your ground and make your presence count in a respectful way. I think some of the challenges that I saw were more maybe some behavioral things, and the way that I addressed them I might speak about. So maybe just to say, the male-dominated site environment I started in was a little bit rough around the edges, and the language I guess that was used wasn't always sort of conducive to creating that respectful environment. And I tried to kind of use humor in a way as well to help address that. Not that it was ever huge issues. As I mentioned, my site agent was really very good and supportive as a male ally. But we started doing things like having a little swear jar on site and just sort of helping people when they say something that's inappropriate, really seeing the consequence of it. But then we use it for something that's for the good of the team, like a barbecue on Friday. Things like just not having other women to talk to, that was pretty real. I was aside from the tea lady who came to site every now and again, I was really the only other female, and that had some logistical implications to it. Things like restrooms on site that had to be sort of specially open and shut for me to use, like that type of thing. That was quite real, but again, it sort of came with the territory, and I guess using humor and using sort of just that being able to just speak my mind in a respectful way. I think that was sort of key to helping resolve those issues.
Thanks, Jeannie. And clearly site-based work has long presented challenges from an equality perspective and still does, traditionally being male-dominated. The champions of change at the moment are doing some work to address respect and safety on site. So it's very much a topic of priority for us as a coalition. Jeannie, what are some simple things that you've seen change or improved on site over time?
Gosh, well, the super obvious one is representation. I think I've been in this industry now for about 15 years, and I think the diversity of roles that women play on site, like it's just grown, and I'm certainly not alone anymore. I think that's really, really wonderful and encouraging for everyone to know that people can really aspire and have role models in so many diverse roles. I think from even project directors, I was listening to a talk on Friday where one of the project directors from John Holland was talking, and I think that was really cool that someone who leads huge teams, and actually on a construction site is female. I think that role modeling is really, really massive and very important. I will also report that the availability of restrooms has improved. But I think on a serious note, we can't not talk about respect and safety, in a very sort of serious way. We have to give it that attention. So there's compulsory training. I think that's important. Like that's the minimum, but we have that. And I don't know if that was around 15 years ago necessarily. So people don't have an excuse not to know what the standard is for respect and inclusivity. So all employees need to go through this. It's non-negotiable, and it touches on topics like harassment, it touches on topics like inclusive language, and how we challenge our biases and things like promotion. So that's certainly, as you spoke about, something that's being rolled out in many, many organizations. But yeah, we still see that, the opposite of respect still becomes visible. It still becomes visible in language, offensive language. But I think these days you see way more that everyone is actually speaking up and saying, that's not on, or it's not just the HR person who will take someone aside. It's like, most people are on the same page. So I think that's definitely improved. And then harassment, that's a really, really serious one, especially sexual harassment. But I feel like having accessible and reliable, visible channels to report sexual harassment, and that women also know that something will happen when they report and that they don't need to be afraid of retaliation. I think that's become way more visible and sort of assuring for women as well. So yeah, I think that calling out of unacceptable behavior that Colin was talking about, I think that's way more prevalent these days. Last, I want to talk about safety. And safety is super practical. And I think we often think of safety with PPE and thinking of our workplaces in terms of, physical safety for people. But, it has worker well-being, it has mental health, it has a whole host of things coming with it. And as we go through different life phases, our safety, the things that we need to think about around our safety is different. And I think we need to have the ability to speak to those working with us, those that we are reporting to think about those things with us too. For instance, I had 2 children, and through both of those pregnancies, if I had been on a construction site and if I'd been involved in high-risk activities, I would have needed to speak to my superior about which task might not only be putting my safety in danger, but also the child that I'm carrying. So yeah, safety is really everyone's business. And I think people are just thinking about things more, especially now that, men are also taking up family responsibility leave. Flexibility is something that, more people are thinking about. I think our general awareness of a society is helping a lot here. But we still need to, be quite intentional and be able to measure these things, as I guess the HR side of things obviously does.
One thing I would probably add to, like I agree with you, I still think there's a long way to go on site, but I think we also have come a long way, when I was talking before about being on site for that project on that dam in Queensland, I couldn't actually get site gear that fit me because they didn't make it for women. And now I can get, my site gear in a whole range of different sizes. There's a lot more visibility of women on site. So I went to a site visit in New Zealand recently, one of our sites over there, where they have, if you are a visitor on site and you wear a pink hard hat, they donate $5 to breast cancer research, which, is probably 15 years ago, there would be no way that you'd be donating to a women's charity for a site, for people who are coming for a site visit. So I certainly think that things have changed over the last 15, 20 years, but we've got a long way to go.
And that's what I forgot to mention. I also heard from a contracted friend in the last couple of weeks that in terms of having an understanding of people's responsibilities as well, a lot of us are in caring roles, whether we are male or female, but really having an understanding that people's caring responsibilities might impact their ability to work over certain periods of the day. Now, I do understand that construction is definitely very program-based and every second counts, but I have heard that there are contractors who are sort of starting to think more about having different shift options for people who might not be able to start as early in the morning due to childcare drop-off responsibilities, and I think those initiatives definitely wouldn't have been there before it was 7 to 4 or whatever the norm was. So so people are definitely starting to think differently about just diversity and inclusion on site.
That's a great segue, Jeannie, into my next kind of questions, which are around, I guess, organisational policies that impact gender equality. And I wanted to talk about parental leave and flex working. So maybe, Kate, if I can start with you, are you able to share an experience where taking parental leave has impacted your career progression? And how did you navigate that challenge?
Yes, I wish it wasn't the case, Ellen, but unfortunately I can share a story of where it's impacted my career. So back when I was due to have my first child, I was ready for promotion. I had a female mentor at the time, and she advised me that she'd seen a few women impacted when they went on parental leave. So we got together and we devised a scheme, I suppose, where I would get acknowledgement from the regional manager that I was ready. And I did that. I had a form signed by him to say I'd achieved all the competencies and requirements and that I should be promoted. But when it came down to it, I was told, well, we can't promote you while you're on parental leave because if you don't come back, we'll have to pay you out at the higher salary. So that was the first excuse. And then when I did come back, they said to me, oh, well, it's out of cycle now. You'll have to wait until promotions come round again before we can promote you, so, as if babies wait for promotion cycles. You know, we know that's not the case. And what happened was it actually took a full 2 years from having that piece of paper signed to when I was actually promoted, even though I had been ready for nearly, 2 years to go into that new role. So it certainly has in the past held our women back, and it makes a big difference. And I'm so glad to say that some of our policies now make sure that doesn't happen. As a leader myself, if we've got people going on parental leave, we always make sure that we include them in the promotion cycle, that we're considering whether they're ready or not, regardless of whether they're having a baby or if they're a man going on parental leave to go share the caring responsibilities with their partner. Same thing goes around. So.
Yes, absolutely. I think this is an area where we've made really significant progress over the years, and hopefully experiences like you've shared a few and far between now, with very inclusive policies around salary reviews and merit reviews and promotions and equal application of that, regardless of gender, during the period that somebody may be on parental leave. Thank you for sharing that, Kate. I might, in the interest of time, jump to you, Colin. When you became a father, were there any leave provisions for you to spend that critical, important time with your newborn? And how do you support your team members to take parental leave now, given the change that we've seen, the cultural change that we've seen around this over the past 10 years?
Yeah, thanks, Ellen. Yeah, my two kids were born in 2004 and 2006, so there was no paid parental leave. I think they came in 2011 or thereabouts. So I remember taking a couple of weeks annual leave each time. So, my ability to share the parental workload with my wife was limited, right, or seemingly limited, which did put a lot of strain on her. I mean, I was lucky, though. There were plenty of people who had to take that leave but didn't have the leave balances and did it for free, right? So it's a much more equitable system now. So these days, anyone who's starting or extending a family can get access paid parental leave, and it's become quite normalised within the team to take the leave, both for male and female team members. And I guess what I've seen has developed, though, is when the leave is taken. So it's not necessarily for the time immediately post-birth. I think you've got something like 2 years from memory to take the leave. I've got a colleague right now who's just taken parental leave, a male colleague who's just taken parental leave from 6 months after the birth, because that time suited his partner, who wanted to start transitioning back into work, and he wanted to be able to help her with that transition. So we support this in the company through planning to make sure that, there isn't a negative narrative around, dropping the ball, letting down the client, letting down the team and so on. And that's really important, because all that goes to creating a positive cultural change as well. So it's, in the distant past, your home life was something you did out of hours, and we all know that pressures at home can impact your performance at work and vice versa. So with this kind of flexibility, there is a license to manage that better and deliver a better outcome for the individual, their family, and this can really only have a positive impact on the business's culture.
Thanks, Colin. We've definitely come a little way over the last decade or so. And returning from parental leave, often we see people ask for flexible work arrangements. And again, in the past, they were hard to come by. They were strictly regulated. There was legislation around who could and who couldn't request flexible working. We've seen a big shift there as well. And both AECOM and Jacobs have really flexible working practices now. Jeannie, you've had children. And have children and raising children. How has flexible working helped you keep the balance between your work and personal life?
Yeah, firstly, I want to talk about also the promotion during parental leave, and I can say, that's happened for me. So the first time I went on parental leave, I was due for promotion, and I did get that actually. So it was really cool. I didn't actually expect it, but it just goes to show what people actually living the policy can do. So secondly, coming back from parental leave, yes, I decided both instances that I would like to come back part-time. Although it is challenging, as a project manager and sort of a design manager, yeah, I've been able to take advantage of it. I kind of sit on 3.5 days a week now, so I kind of move it around sometimes as deadlines require. But the secret, I think, is really just expectations. I think the biggest source of conflict in the world is unmet expectations. So as long as we all put our expectations on the table as an employee, as an employer, and working through our clients as well, as Colin mentioned, that we don't look like we are not delivering. As long as everyone is on the same page and we've got our expectations well understood, it can really, really work well. So yeah, I think for us, we've seen benefits as a family. I'm trying to raise my children as bilinguals, and having time to spend with them, that's been key, and also selfishly, I couldn't stay away from work too long. So I didn't want to, take more than a year or 11 months worth of parental leave. So it's really about what worked for me, but it's also, being able to be clear about just how we're going to do this. So no one is left in the dark.
I think from my perspective, the next step is actually getting more men in flexible work. Because I have certainly seen that change a fair bit we've got a lot more male part-timers than we used to have previously. But there's this great quote from a book that Annabelle Crabb wrote, The Wife Drought, where she talks about women facing the glass ceiling, whereas men face the glass fire escape. And there's still that societal pressure of, the men having to be the main breadwinner and having to be the provider for family. That still exists. And I think the more that we can work together as an industry to make part-time work for men more acceptable, the better that we're going to be in terms of, from a societal perspective, sharing the caring responsibilities with families, but also giving flexibility to our male colleagues, some of whom may actually want to work part-time but don't feel that they can because of that societal pressure.
Thanks, Jeannie. Thanks, Kate. We've got 6 minutes left. I can't see any questions in our Q&A chat at this point, but I do have one final question for all three of you, actually. And that is, if you could tell us all in one sentence or so, what is one tangible action that you would suggest for the audience here today that they can take away and make progress in their own organisations around gender equality? Kate, do you want to go first since you're on my screen?
Thank you. And so for me, I'd encourage anyone who's on the call today to have a look at the Champions of Change resources that Ellen shared earlier. So just have go do a Google search for them. There are so many helpful guides and a heap of information on the website to just to support you in dismantling the barriers to gender equality.
Thanks, Kate. Jeannie?
I think for me, it's really about having those role models and people that you can talk to. I think for companies to really invest in, in mentors, but also in people managers, because every single change that we need to go through, whether it's a promotion or whether it's a change in our, ability to do specific tasks, we need to be able to check that with a compassionate and an understanding people manager. So really for companies and businesses to empower their leaders, to be compassionate leaders, I think that's a very important one from my side.
Thank you, Jeannie. And Colin?
Yeah, quite kind of similar to Jeannie, really. I would just call for all the men on the call to get involved, to be active in promoting gender equality and, calling out biases, be really active. But the key thing, I think, is it doesn't have to be the biggest problem, in your life. Start with your immediate team. Start with the junior people in your team, right? Put up an investment in the future. People will see what's going on. They'll use your example. And then those who you have, trained, I suppose, for want of a better word, will then spread that message to others, right? So I guess, start biting it off from the point of view of your immediate team, and then you'll see the results.
Thank you, Colin, and thank you to all three of you for sharing your experiences and your words of wisdom. Hopefully they have been taken on board by people of the audience, and we can all do something to progress gender equality within our own organisations. I can't see any questions in the chat. We've got a couple of minutes left. I don't know if anybody had any questions that you wanted to ask, or maybe raise your hand to ask, or pop into the chat. Otherwise, we will give you a few minutes of your time back.
Yeah, good, thanks, Ellen. And I'll just share my screen. And ladies and gentlemen, I'd ask you to join in thanking our speakers that have had some great stories and insights into people, profession and change. And so, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking our speakers this afternoon, Isabella, Ellen, Kate, Jeannie and Colin.